It's funny. I don't know if you saw. I sent you an email yesterday,
Yep.
kind of uh,
It was
reminding you, I
helpful.
guess, of the last conversation. I thought it might be. I didn't know if you had kind of the technology on your side that maybe reminded you. I figured remembering a conversation from 2 years ago probably wasn't going to happen automatically, um, but no, it's funny because like the way the last conversation, kind of the follow up after it was a little bit like different than what I expected, because I know that there was some stuff that I felt like I had left out when we talked, and I emailed you afterward. It was just kind of like, hey, here's some other stuff, and you were like, put it in the comment section on YouTube or whatever, like, kind of like this isn't a conversation just between us; it's a conversation between this whole kind of community, I guess. Which, like, at the time, I was not thinking about it that way at all. Like, this was a conversation between me and Paul, and like, this just, just talking about stuff that's on my mind, kind of thing. So that was really, a little bit of a, I don't know, eye opener, I guess, but
Was it
definitely
a
like
good
made me
thing or a
think
bad
differently.
thing?
I don't know if it was good or bad. I mean, it was good that I understood it better after, like I just didn't understand really that the conversation that I was having was I mean, I knew it was public, I guess. It's not just with you, I guess, is the thing that was kind of like, oh, okay. So this is so I think what might make that a little bit more understandable, I guess, why I was so, I guess, naive about that, is that I don't engage in like comment sections or like I try to avoid engaging with strangers through technology. Like I am happy to engage with strangers at the grocery store, or when I'm getting food or something, when they're humans, right? But when they're avatars, I feel like, and I mean, I see it happen to lots of other people where, like, and Jordan Peterson's talked about this a lot too, right? Where it's just like they're not people, we just don't behave the same way. Um, and I don't know if I mean, I guess I could probably make a good argument that I could control myself and not lose track of what's reality or what's an avatar or what's the internet. But I kind of just don't even want to challenge myself that way. Like, if I don't have to, why do it? Um, and so that's kind of the thing too, was like engaging in the comment section was just like, I'm just gonna choose not to anyway, just because I don't do it ever. There's lots of
Yeah.
times when I'm watching one of your videos or any other video, or even stuff people post on Facebook, or something like that, where I feel like I have something interesting to say.
Yeah.
And then I just go, no, I'll just leave it alone. Like, it's not so interesting that I need to get into that, down into those weeds with people I don't even know, because you just never know, where those things lead to. And, I try to be conscious of, what that could mean, because it's so much bigger than anything I can really understand.
Yeah. That's very
Yeah, you
true.
know more than anybody.
Yeah. And gosh, it, it really does feel like we play with things that we have insufficient understanding of, and we certainly don't know where these things go.
Mm-hmm.
And will good things or bad things come out of them? Probably both.
For
And
sure. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well,
and
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 you,
that's part of the reason that I really want to give people the opportunity to do a conversation like this that we don't post, and that's usually about half of them.
yeah.
And there are real good reasons for that. um
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, other people sign on because they do want to have a conversation that does get posted, and they want to engage in this. We don't even know what the thing is, we really don't. And especially
Mm-hmm.
you, I don't know if you're still doing it, but as a house church guy, because in many ways,
We're not doing it, but we can get into that.
okay,
But go ahead.
but that's, different sizes of church are, that's a huge deal. I mean, if you have a
Mm-hmm.
church of 10 or 50, or 200 or 500 or 1,000. I mean, and up from there, it's all different, and they're not the
Hmm.
same thing. So anyway, so no, fair enough. I hope I didn't invite you into or set you up for something that you didn't really want to participate in. I mean, I every now and then I get an email from someone that says, could you pull our conversation down? This is sure,
Sure.
no problem.
Yeah.
Because not everyone should be doing this.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, for me, it was really, it was just an opportunity to learn. I mean, I didn't see it as anything other than like, oh, okay, like that. It's a conversation with the broader group and not just the two, which is good. In a lot of ways, it's good because the broader group has the ability to, point out things or um, you know, I don't know what the right way to kind of define it is, but there's definitely value that comes with a broader, kind of conversation that's happening, which, coincidentally is kind of why the house church thing was born in the first place. And the kind of long story short of that is we went remote during COVID and just didn't survive after, a year of that, basically. So
I can especially understand that, because remote from a small church like mine is painful, but a small church like mine still has this public worship service, which is in
mhm.
some ways anonymous, which anyone can come into and sit and leave and have extremely minimal participation. But uh, you know, something more like a house church.
Yeah. Well, it was tough too because like so it's been about a year since we stopped. So we had done the remote thing for a year, and it, house church was just conversation. I mean, there was kind of a person leading the conversation, based on um, a passage in scripture that we were working through, but it was really about the ability to talk through it and the ability to kind of share the the things that we got out of it and correct, the things that other people might say, that I think is so important to hear people say things that kind of don't make sense, and to be able to tell them that what they're saying doesn't make sense, because if they never say it out loud and nobody tells them, then they just go on thinking that it makes sense forever.
Yep.
And so a big part of the house church thing was the conversation. So moving to remote meant doing video calls, weekly video calls as a group, um, which also meant that we were really only meeting weekly, the house church meeting was only weekly, but because the world was open, we were also seeing each other more frequently than weekly, right? But because we really trimmed it down to just this, like, 1 hour, hour and a half, 2 hours sometimes meeting, that, there was some connection lost. And then, there were reasons why meeting together was a problem, even, when things started to open up somewhat at different times. There's somebody who's working in the, medical industry where they really couldn't take a lot of risk with their health. And we had a newborn baby. And so there was, there was a lot of, reasons why we were limiting kind of the risk taking and forcing it to stay digital. But it also wore on people, right? I mean, to the extent where it was like, okay, we're not meeting in person as a body, and everybody kind of coincidentally, I guess to some extent, unbeknownst to each other for the most part, started and we were meeting on Sunday evenings. So Sunday mornings, people started going to local churches, their own, like in their neighborhoods. And it was kind of like, why am I doing this still on Sunday night when I've basically become a part of this real life in-person human community now? And so it was easy to kind of walk away for everybody, because we were all walking away knowing that we weren't just kind of leaving anybody kind of hanging, right? Nobody kind of, it didn't end and some people weren't in a church anymore. Everybody just kind of found a home that made more sense for where everybody was at the time. So not a bad ending or anything, but definitely a different world for me now as just a member of a local church than kind of being as invested in the house church that was meeting at my house, that had to be clean every week to have people come and visit. than it was then. But I guess such is life.
Yep. So what's on your mind for this talk? What do you want to talk about?
So I couldn't believe there was actually an opening on your calendar. I look occasionally just because, I enjoyed our last talk. Let's, talk again. And so I saw it and was like, I'm just going to take it. And so I have a bunch of like random kind of disconnected things. I wrote them down so I wouldn't forget them. So I can kind of we can see how far we get through the list I have. I could kind of tell you what I have on the list, and we could see if there's anything in particular you'd be interested in kind of drilling down into.
I'll just take what you think, take where you want to start, and then we'll take it from there. You can work the list, or we'll see where the conversation goes.
I'll start with this. A couple more just kind of off the bat things that I listened to your commentary this morning on your kind of reacting to Jordan Peterson's interview. I don't even know. It was the evolutionary biologist, but
David Buss.
Yeah. And I was cracking up, when he's talking about kind of the different selection methods or lack of selection methods for men versus women. And so the funny thing is it popped up last night when I was scrolling through YouTube, kind of killing time, waiting for my wife to kind of be ready to settle in, because we were watching The Bachelor. So we were watching. We're a night behind.
Don't tell me anything. We watch on weekends.
I haven't seen the finale yet, but it was so funny because I saw it come up. I was like, oh, I gotta make sure I see that, especially before I talk to him. But the summary that you did, kind of what happened on the last episode that you did see, I thought it was great. I was sitting there thinking, like, if you wanted to just have a YouTube channel where you just did Bachelor recaps, I think you could have something there. I think it was a really good summary, and I think you'd certainly attract my wife to the audience, which she's not interested at all in the Jordan Peterson conversation. But you have a whole untapped audience that you could tap into if you wanted to go that route. Anyway.
Dude with a big beard does Bachelor commentary. The difficult thing with that is that you just start putting any ABC content on YouTube, and that ain't going to work. So then you have to, figure out how you want to represent it. And so I just told the story, but it's funny.
I think that, and maybe this isn't true of everybody. I think most guys that watch The Bachelor are doing their own commentary through most of it, much to the annoyance of their wives, who just want to hear what the would-be reality stars have to say. Like I don't really care all that much about the details of the conversation. I just like to analyze the interactions across the landscape, which is not the way my wife is intending to view the show at all.
This is exactly what we do with our little Bachelor watch party. It's usually so my son and I, one of my sons and I are there, and of course my wife and my son's girlfriend and one of my daughters, and it's just funny that different, and you're right, the men and the women have very different takes on this. And my son's girlfriend gets a little annoyed. If I'm holding the remote, I usually pause so I can make my statement. Remote taken away from me.
I can imagine. It's like watching a Bachelor episode with you is probably like watching a Jordan Peterson.
That's exactly right.
You said that on the video too at the beginning. Like, if you want to watch the whole thing uninterrupted, go somewhere else.
And someone still made the comment.
Did they? I didn't see it. That's hilarious. That's so
one of the
funny.
first comments. It's like, dude, you keep interrupting them. It's like,
maybe he hadn't gotten to the part where you said you were going to be doing that. So
I think I said it right at the front.
You did. It was like 30 seconds in. So maybe they did it in the first 10.
No, I'd love to do commentary on The Bachelor, but again, it would never. ABC would not let that stuff on YouTube. So
it's funny because a lot of guys that I know, like it's lame to watch The Bachelor, so you have to say, like, I watched it with my wife or something. but the analysis, particularly of like what you were analyzing in terms of the difference between men and women and the way they perceive the actions that were happening there, like I actually find that incredibly interesting. And I think that there's a lot, of human behavior, that you can analyze from that. And you can also analyze, the kind of the human behavior of the way everybody's being manipulated by the creators of The Bachelor as well. But the idea that like that's not interesting to me is just kind of like I think you just never seen it. Like if you're a guy and you just make fun of it, and I don't blame you. I did before I was kind of forced to watch it. But once you start, it's like, hey, there's a lot of interesting interactions going on here. You don't watch it for the romance. You watch it for the other kind of things that are happening. And I think a lot of people who haven't done that they just think it's all romance, but I've never once watched it like, oh my gosh, will they find love? Not one time has that ever crossed my mind. But it doesn't make it any less entertaining.
It's a miracle anyone does through that.
I know, right? Assuming
they find a lot
does.
of other things though.
Right. Yeah.
So my son has this whole vocabulary around it because it's all about, I mean, the first part of the show is tell me your secrets, show me your tears.
Yeah.
Take down the walls, be open, be vulnerable. And then when you get down to like, then you get down to like 9 or 10, and then suddenly they start doing the math and realize some of these girls aren't going to get the one-on-one. And they've been sitting around in the girls' club for a month, away from their jobs, away from their money, with cell phones taken away. I mean, if you read some of the stuff about this, no magazines, they're basically in a really posh prison waiting for this dude. And then some of the girls inevitably figure out, I'm not getting a one-on-one. Clayton, how could you do this to me? Because they've just been so pumped up to be that one season of The Bachelorette where the woman basically 2 weeks in says, nope, there's my guy, I'm done, and leaves.
Yeah. Me and my wife were laughing about that last night because that's what, I'll spoil something for you if I tell you too much, but yeah, there's a reason that came up in our conversation, but it'll make sense to you when you watch when you watch the
well, and then it was so funny because you just get this whole group of dudes in there, and first it was all about Claire, and now it's all about, I forget the other woman's name. That's all about her, and
right.
she's and it's like
there was one guy who used the same words to describe them both, and they all were like, you don't even care about them as individuals. And it's like, what other words is he going to use? He's strictly describing their physical attraction. Like, how many words are there? And he literally like said that. Like, he was just like, okay, I'll describe her as like hot in this way instead of in that way, because you guys want it to be unique in the way I describe her. It's like, man, what kind of silly games?
But you're here for the wrong reasons.
Right. Yeah. As opposed to all of us, we're here for the right reasons, of course.
No, and then of course, once you get down to 3 or 4, and again, in my son's word, that's when all the heart stomping comes, because it's like, crush. Most, all but one of you is going to be severely disappointed during the show. And the one after, yours will come a little later. So bad. So bad.
Yes, it definitely is. All right. I don't really have a good way to transition off of that.
That's okay.
So I'll just look at my list here, and there's a couple of things. So one thing that I thought was interesting, just a couple of clips from the Jordan Peterson on Joe Rogan the last time he was on, and there were a couple of clips that kind of went viral that I thought were really interesting that I just wanted to kind of bring up a little bit, and maybe we can talk about those. My list is really long. We won't get to it all, which is good, so I don't have to worry about filling the time. But basically, so the one that really was, to me, was like, at the time listening to it, was like, why are they talking about this? Was Jordan Peterson talking about like how his skin isn't actually white, and Michael Eric Dyson's skin isn't actually black, and and there's these different shades, and then so they went on this whole little thing about different shades of tan and peach and whatever. And of course, clips like that, especially when they end up kind of going viral, like the people who love to hate Jordan Peterson, like that was like the perfect thing. And I heard and I think Trevor Noah even reacted on the Daily Show, reacted to it. And people kind of like, yeah, we all figured this out in like second grade. Like, how do you not know that? Like, and I remember kind of like, because the timing couldn't have been any better. Like Jordan Peterson said that, the clip kind of goes viral, people react to it. Yeah, this is like, 8-year-olds have figured that out. And then Whoopi Goldberg says that the Holocaust wasn't about race because because Jews are white, because they're all white people fighting white people. So it wasn't about race. And it's like that, like, that's when it all clicked for me. That's when it was like, that's what he was saying. Like, and I feel like that was a real kind of like canary in the coal mine kind of thing that he pointed out there. Like, I don't know if a lot of people really understood how, and I don't know if the root of it is like critical race theory, or if the root of it is, something else, but like there clearly is a lack of understanding about race beyond just everybody's either black or white, and there is no in between, and there is no other. There aren't even historical examples to point to where race, races within subsets of white or black fought against each other because they saw each other as different races, even though, somebody today thinks of them as one big homogenous group, So I just thought that was incredibly like wild, the way like it just kind of played out perfectly to like, okay, Jordan Peterson's dumb, and then Whoopi Goldberg is like, actually, no, we actually like, we really did need that lesson. We really did need that reminder of what we knew as 8-year-olds, but we somehow forgotten because of the culture wars that we've created around these issues,
Yeah. Well, racism is real. It's not just about skin color, but it's not the only game we play. People, when people want to gain advantage or hurt one another, or race is one of the things that are easily at hand to use to do what you want to do. There's one of the homeless guys outside my door. When he'd get in a particularly surly mood, he would just fling epithets at people walking down the street. And it didn't actually matter what their sex or skin color was. He would just throw all of the usual epithets at everyone. And he would throw them all at me sometimes. And it's like,
yeah.
And it, to me, it just was a demonstration that so my wife and I have watched a ton of Survivor. We're trying to get through the whole corpus. And it's interesting in Survivor how often, so you've got so the women, so we're going to have a women's alliance. And so the women's alliance is a fairly common recurring thing on Survivor. And sometimes they're trying to put it together. Sometimes it's the old people or the young people. Sometimes Survivor intentionally sort of mix groups with other sort of archetypes. And it's a demonstration of how when we're looking to get something done, there are certain obvious things that we look for and grab at in order to achieve whatever it is we want to achieve. And race is clearly has been on the list for human beings in this game for a very long time. But to then take that and make it the central piece, just it's a lousy interpretive framework with which to interpret everything. And that's been part of the weakness of the wokeness. And that's why it will go away. It just can't hold up.
Well, yeah. And that's, it reminded me of, kind of some of the stuff that my early engagement with Jordan Peterson, in terms of kind of learning that kind of language of kind of low resolution versus high resolution, kind of frameworks. And I mean, that's the definition. I mean, it's low resolution as it gets. There's There's two colors. You're one or the other, and everything has to fit into that. And every other human interaction is kind of underneath that initial framework. So every interaction between two white people, whether those white people are Russian or Ukrainian, they're just white people interacting, right? And it's
Yeah.
like it's a really it was a really interesting kind of process to kind of watch unfold, right? Or to kind of see real time how how something that seems so obvious is not really that obvious still.
Yeah. Oh,
And how we still have to work it out.
We're fairly, I mean, again, you're right. It's a low resolution, high resolution thing. And there's a reason we take things at low resolution, because we have to, because again, the world is so complex. And so we only ratchet up the resolution as we need to. And so that's where you get into the relevance realization. So then we're always trying to look at some low resolution inflection point that is good enough for the task at hand, whatever that task might be. And that task might be the context of a conversation, might be the context of a decision within a community. And so that's where sort of the resolution language, it was one of the first things I grabbed from Jordan Peterson. When I first heard him say that, it's like, resolution, what does he mean?
Mm-hmm.
And then I listened to him. I thought, oh, that's really handy. And what's interesting too is that this is a technological aspect that once you start using computers and you figure out what a thumbnail is, and let's say you're going to take that thumbnail and you want to use it for something else, and you expand it, and it's like, ooh, that's, and then, when I first playing around with digital photography, you've got a 1 megapixel image. It's like, okay, well, what can I do with that? Then you got 3 megapixels, but then you wind up with 1620, and like in this Samsung, you've got a 108 megapixel sensor in there, and it's like, well, I don't want to have to be storing photographs directly from a 108 megapixel camera. They'll be enormous. No, there's pixel binning, and we make them small,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's really relevance realization and resolution sort of meet each other. And in any conversation, even just the flow of speech wants us to become precise. And so then, and what's amazing is that we do this all for the most part without a lot of consciousness, and we do it in real time. It's an astounding thing that we're able to even just have a conversation.
Yeah. So actually, I think that is a good kind of segue, at least to some extent. I'll force it to be one if it's not, into kind of the other big kind of takeaway from me from Jordan Peterson on his last Rogan appearance was the Bible is truer than true thing. And so he makes that statement, and it's kind of like, as a Christian, it's easy to kind of be like, well, yeah, duh, like, kind of in some sense by definition, I guess. But the more I kind of sat on that, the more it kind of clicked with me. And you talked a little bit about this as well. And you, there was a conversation that he had recently, and you talked about kind of that whole, like, using literal, it kind of in overgeneralizing what literal means, right? But the thing that really got me as I was thinking about it is, like, truer than true is deeper than kind of our even material understanding of truth. And so it kind of brought me to, like, this idea of like a Ken Ham, or like a the kind of creationist argument that, like, the emphasis on the need for the material world to prove kind of that the Bible is truth in the material definition of truth is like I don't even know if Ken Ham believes the Bible is truer than true, because I don't know that Ken Ham is digging below true, right? Like true me, and I was thinking about, like, I don't know if you ever watched the, like, Ken Ham Bill Nye debate. It was like over 10 years ago now, probably. But they debated, And it was just, it's awful. I mean, to watch. I haven't like gone back and rewatched it, but I can only imagine how much more it would frustrate me now than it did then. But like, because every argument is based on like, well, what does the fossil record say? And what does the, like, what can we glean from looking at these, hardened rocks from, these bones that like, and it's like every word of it is material. Every word of it is attempting to leverage the material world to demonstrate which side is more accurate. And I'm like, the whole thing is so, it's that same thing as kind of the understanding of literal, right? It's all based on the idea that the material world is the foundation for kind of what is true. And the reason I said that it's a good segue from kind of the idea that like the unbelievable processing power of our brains to converse is a good example of like creation itself is so, it's also kind of truer than true. I mean, the Bible is part of God's creation, right? Like, and Jordan Peterson talks about that when he's explaining this. Like, all the books that come after it are man's creation. The Bible is God's creation. And so is all of this is God's creation. And it's like, we like to separate the Bible, and then at least the kind of religious or the Christian environment that I've lived most of my life in, there's this like the Bible is kind of above everything else in terms of like, it's important. It is above because it's the only thing in a language that we can really interpret. But there's a language of creation, and I think that probably even gets into the whole God number one, God number two. I think if I understand God number one, God number two correctly, which I'm not convinced at all that I do. But that's why, like, I don't know, that whole thing was just such a big revelation to me, to kind of a lot of things kind of fell in place around that idea of the Bible being truer than true.
Yeah. It was a Rationality Rules did a video on it, which was kind of interesting. Actually, it was rather dull because he sort of keeps going back to, and I'm sure I do it too. I keep going back to my favorite spots, but watching Ken Ham and Bill Nye, at least Bill Nye, I think is a little bit more consistent. Ken Ham hasn't thought through what the underpinnings of his approach really entail. And so in that sense, Ken Ham doesn't understands, even at least Bill Nye, even though I think he finally can't stand where he is, at least he's consistent. Ken Ham, you would, if you'd really follow that approach all the way down, then in a sense, God is also a material being so it just sort of has the order of spirit and matter.
Yeah, it's funny because you actually went a different direction there at the end than I thought. Because what came to my mind, and I think I've heard you say this before. I think I get a lot of things from you, and I probably attribute more to you than actually is attributable to you. But you're welcome. But a lot of things
good.
I think I picked up from you this idea of like the Father, Son, and the Holy Bible, like this kind of framework.
Father, Son, and Holy Scriptures.
But that was kind of where I was going with that kind of Ken Ham. Like, if you dig down, like that holds, like that is essentially God, the words themselves, and not God's creation created to describe God and what God actually is, which is even beyond that and our ability to understand that, right?
Yeah. Well, it gets down to the Protestant Catholic fight. Does the Bible, do scriptures make church, or do church make scriptures? And it's a little difficult for Christianity because at least the majority of the scriptures come before the church, and the tail end come after the church. And so, and it's, I watch Protestants and Catholics fight about this, and both sides deserve listening to, because in some ways there's I forget who said it right now, it could be Leslie Newbegin. The church is the hermeneutic of the scriptures. I mean, the church is what the scriptures should produce, and yet scripture should be read within the church. And then you have to ask the question, well, what is the church? Well, it's this community, and it's also a long conversation about the scriptures. And so all of our theological fights, all of our trying to figure out what's right and what's good and what's proper, and the revelation of God is all done within that process through time.
Well, and then there's, talk about, increasing resolution is all the questions you could ask about even what you just said, right? Like, okay, the church is a community. Well, what's a community, right? Like,
that's right.
Like a community is maybe the bridges of meaning and the comment thread on YouTube, which I don't participate in, but I'm still gleaning, things from them.
Fair warning, if we post this, no comments from Brad.
Yeah. Well, actually, so I didn't mention this, but there was Karen at the meeting code on the comment section just kind of said, if you see this, reach out to me, and I did, and we actually had a conversation on her channel. So I'll have a conversation, but it's not going to be one that's typed. And even if I wanted to, I couldn't carry on much of a typed conversation very long, because I have 4 kids and a life. So not to say that other people don't, but it's just impossible to do. But so what the other thing about kind of the Ken Ham thing is, Ken Ham, the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter, they're like right down the road from me. I'm like 45-minute drive from these things. So I've been to both of them.
Are they really building a Tower of Babel?
I have no idea.
I saw that on Twitter. I think it was Tripp posted something that they're building a Tower of Babel. It's like
that's one of those things that makes you go like, is that real, or did that come from the Babylon Bee? Like that.
Yeah, I know that's true, because it's like, so you want to build a Tower of Babel, do you? Did you really read the story?
Right. Well, so it's interesting that you say that too, because the whole Ark thing, and going back to kind of Ken Ham's framework and the idea of the material world being kind of proof of God using the material world as your main basis of evidence, is like, I think, and I could be wrong, and I don't want to speak for Ken Ham, but I think that the Ark Encounter, at least to some extent, is made as a kind of attempt to prove that it was possible, right? Like, here's an Ark. This is what it would actually look like. This is how it could have worked. This is what, like, it's kind of trying to say, like, see, it's not as crazy as it might sound.
I want to know if they had something more than just the text. I want to know if they had an engineer take the text and make
that's exactly
plans.
You took the words out of my mouth. You took the words directly out of my mouth, Paul, because that's exact. And I wonder if one man built it by himself and with his 3 kids, right? With his 3 sons. Like it's so funny you said that, because that's exactly where I was going. And I think a better way to describe the Ark Encounter that Ken Ham has built, it's a monument. Like, it doesn't prove anything. It's as real of a representation of the Ark as a Lincoln Monument is of Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
And nothing, and no more real than that.
Can you go inside of it?
Oh yeah, you can walk through it and see here's how they could have kept animals in cages and what that would look like, and how they would kind of store food. And I mean, it's interesting. It's really interesting, kind of from the mind of, or minds of, they're not dumb people, and they're not, they know kind of the history. They know what the world would have kind of been like at the time, technology that probably could have been developed by that point. Like, they put a lot of thought into it. And so from that perspective, it's interesting. And the funny thing is, if you think about kind of the Ken Ham versus Bill Nye aspect of it, like, I've also been to say like the Natural History Museum at the Smithsonian in DC or something. And I feel the same way when I go through that. Like
Yep.
I remember
Yep.
going, it's been a long time, but I remember walking through it and like, it'll be like, we found a piece of a skull that's like, less than 1 square inch. And from this piece of a skull, we know what the entire like, humanoid, Neanderthal being was like. I'm like, how could you possibly know that?
Would you put this? Would you put this creature up in your bedroom?
right.
How would that go?
Or do you know if this creature actually exists? Like you're filling in gaps to try to make it make sense, which is fine. But so does Ken Ham. He has creatures that don't exist today, that there's not even really necessarily a record of them existing, and makes a lot of assumptions. And the people at the Natural History Museum do the exact same thing. And they both think the other is a complete idiot and completely wrong and has no basis for anything they say. Yeah. And that to me is the funniest like thing to kind of step back and look at and be like, okay, you guys really don't realize you're just mirrors, right? Like you're the exact same, which I guess kind of, to segue off of that a little bit, makes me kind of think of the kind of woke movement as a religion. And I know you've talked about that, versus kind of like the 90s Christian culture that I grew up in, where when I look at like the kind of competition to see who's most offended, or like the things that are kind of the strictly off, like I grew up in a time when, what is that, parental advisory content warnings were being put on CDs, and like, it was edgy to have a CD that had that label on it when we were in junior high.
What do we have to say to get the label?
Right. But then it's like now the exact same things are being applied, just in a different way. But it's like, again, it's like you are mirrors. Like all the people that I grew up being taught that kind of stuff from, now we'll talk about how great Joe Rogan or Adam Carolla or whoever is for kind of their free speech stance. And it's like, you hated, like, not just their type, those individuals 20 years ago for doing what Bill Maher, exactly the same thing. Yeah, and it's like, but you can see kind of why. But then on the other side, it's exactly reversed. You loved Bill Maher, you loved Joe Rogan, you loved Adam Carolla, and the list goes on because of how edgy they were. And now you can't stand it. And it's like, and I mean, everything kind of comes back around, I guess, but it's just so funny to see the exact same things get played out and just being applied in different ways.
Yeah. Rick told me that Bill Maher was on Ben Shapiro, and I thought, wow, I'll have to watch that, because
I saw it the other day.
I used to watch Bill Maher when he was on network TV with Politically Incorrect. I taped that show. I watched every episode. I loved it. I loved that he got different people in there, that, he'd often have, conservative Christians in there, and he'd let them argue their piece, and he was on good terms with them. And, I mean, I love that. And so, I mean, it shows in my channel, obviously, but I think it's just great fun.
Yeah. I mean, and I think there's something to like being open to both sides. It makes you appreciate the good from both sides, and it also makes it really obvious how kind of ridiculous both sides are in certain areas.
Yeah.
And once you get kind of locked into like an ideological team, then it's like all that just disappears. Like you just no ability to see over the fence at all. It's just gone.
Yeah. That's true.
So I know we don't have a ton of time left. The other thing I did have written down was God number 1, God number 2 thing. And I referenced it earlier, and I don't know if I referenced it correctly, because I told you, I really don't know if I understand it as well as I would like to. So I'm curious. I don't know if you remember kind of how I referenced it, if I was even on the right track.
Well, I came up with this, and I'll start with its genesis story, because I was listening to Jordan Peterson talk to Sam Harris, and became abundantly clear that when both of them used the word God, they were very much referring to two different things. And so that's where I didn't want labels. The whole point of the exercise was exploration. What is
Mm-hmm.
Sam Harris talking about? What is Jordan Peterson talking about? So in that sense, number one and number two were intentionally blank so that I could put different things in them and try them out. And so over the last 3 years, I've been just sort of putting different things in because it's a duality. And then people are like, well, God number three. And it's like, no, it's not a Trinitarian thing. And it's a duality thing because it's a contrast between what they're talking about, because I had a sense that if you could understand, especially Sam Harris's definition of God, you could have a better handle on where all of these atheist theist debates on YouTube go wrong. And Sam Harris sort of thinks about God as a super thing in the sky. So then we have personal, impersonal, immanent, transcendent. Immanent, transcendent. I had a good conversation with Yosef from the Discord server, and he basically pointed out that there's a lot of immanent and transcendent have a lot of interesting dynamics between those two. And lately, I've been much more arenic and agentic. But there are really interesting relationships between arenic and agentic too, because as the father of your family, you have an arenic quality in the home. And even when you're not physically present as an agent, who you are and what you've done creates a context. But then you also get to masculine, feminine. So I keep basically using this as ways to work through polarities and dualisms. And
so the piece that you just said, so that's kind of where I am too in the whole, kind of agent versus arena framework. And you said exactly what I've been thinking through on this kind of as the father of the family thing. And I don't know if you remember the kind of conversation that you and I had last time about kind of there's parent-child relationships, but then there's the romantic spousal relationships, and there's the sibling relationships that all kind of project outward kind of fractally, right? So a parent-child relationship is also reflected in a boss and employee, and then a sibling relationship is in a peer or a teammate, and there's not really other examples of a romantic relationship, which I think is also kind of important because of it points to how significant Christ is as the central figure, because in my framework, Christ kind of represents that marital spousal love in the relationship with him in the church. But I think that whole agent and arena thing kind of goes out that direction as well, right? Like I think that I'm not only the arena to the extent that I'm setting the tone within my household for my kids, but to the extent that I'm engaging with other members of my community or peers, then I'm setting up the kind of agent arena relationship with them as well. And it's one thing that I talk about a lot when I talk to people, about kind of my philosophy, about parenting. And I'm glad that I've kind of been using it correctly, but that's what I've kind of gone to is like God number one, God number two thing is that like that when somebody, talks to me about like, am I disciplining in a certain way or do I have a routine for like Bible study things? And I think those things are important to be, building into my kids as they're growing. But I always kind of, add into that kind of list of that checklist of what a good dad is in some sense of like, it's not just doing the things, it's living the thing. Like the model, like they're much more impacted by the way that I live than the fact that I carve out an hour of time for this routine every day, or that I, emphasize, whatever this one thing is, that like it's going to manifest itself everywhere. And I think one of the things, everybody kind of has talked about the kind of generation that has left the church largely, that grew up in the church and left. A lot of people my age, I mean, those are my peer, and I know a lot of those people personally. I grew up with them in church, and I think that is where a lot of the fracture happens, is that in the home, which is why, something like house church was so important to me when we were able to do it, was that like I don't like the idea of I need to go to a place and that's where God is and where church is, and where like I should be building that actively in my home every day with the way that I operate and the way I interact, and what I model to my family and beyond, right? And so like there's a need to kind of understand and acknowledge that kind of within families, or it's going to keep going, right? The idea that we can just have people come to the church and tell them, hey, if you just do these things, then you can raise Christian kids. It's like you have to, I mean, really, to be as, I guess, Christianese about it as possible, is like you have to genuinely repent and change who you are. Your kids will only adopt what you are, not what you tell them you want them to be.
Yep.
And
they can't
that's
see
where,
your
like,
ideals. They can only see you.
Exactly. And that's where like that arena thing. And then the other thing that I kind of thought about that kind of, I think ties back, kind of this arena side. I mean, I think the agent side of God is the side that we spend a ton of time on. And the arena side is kind of the side that I think Jordan Peterson kind of helped a lot of people see. And I think that is where that whole kind of clean your room meme catches on, right? It's like that, like I'm setting the tone in my house also by the environment itself. Like that is to the extent that everything is God's creation and the representation of who he is and his character, then the way I organize the things within my authority are a representation of what I think about God and what I think about the world and how I contribute to ultimately bringing good into it and bringing and manifesting, not manifesting God, manifesting a vision of God, I guess is, I can't think of a better language, but to bring that about in the world, right?
I know the word's getting used for a lot of other things, but it's not a bad word. It's what the word means.
Yeah, right. But yeah, so that's, I think, where the, like, why that clean your room thing is so huge. Like that's the thing that I always emphasize, about, like, if you're say your house is a wreck or something, and you're trying to tell your kids the importance of, taking care of things or being good stewards or whatever, of whatever it is, then like you're not, there's a disconnect. Right. So it has to be, it's the environment itself down to the tiniest details are saying the loudest things. Like, when the Bible says that the rocks will cry out, like the tiny details of the things that we create or contribute to the creation of or organization of will speak louder than anything we attempt to communicate through our words in the level.
Yep. No, it's true. It's very true. That's, people are often asking me, I say, well, could you have advice for parenting? Is be who you want your children to become.
Right.
Because that's what they will grow into you. And
right.
Depending on how you feel about that, and they also won't, because they are different. And it's my mother-in-law was named Jeanette, and sometimes, if my wife was adopted, and so she's just, she just had her mother, but sometimes it's sort of genetic squared, it's Jeanette squared, because it's both the nature and the nurture. But yet still, I mean, children are amazing. I've got 5, and they're all different. They're all individuals. And sometimes it's amazing how different they are, but yet it's also amazing what they have in common. And again, that part of it's that we started out talking about sort of the relationship between the combinatorial explosiveness of the world. The world is so massive, and human beings are so subtle and complex that we manifest that massiveness in ourselves. Yet there's also the relevance realization of, okay, this is how I can see the commonality between my 5 children, the commonality within our family, yet also the uniqueness. And you see that with, people, let's say a brother, two brothers, one rejects the faith, walks away from it, deconstructs, whatever language you want to use, and the other holds to it. There's often amazing things that the one who deconstructed will remain within. I find people who have deconstructed that remain, fundamentalists to their core. Now, there might be fundamentalist atheists, but they remain fundamentalist.
Right.
That part they didn't reject. And of course, we don't know ourselves hardly at all. So there's so much of us that we just can't see, that others can see in us. And it's obvious to the rest of the world, but our eyes point out we can't see ourselves.
Yeah.
And we don't have adequate mirrors to actually see ourselves.
So I know we're at the end of time. If I could throw something out there really fast.
Yeah, go ahead. I've got a few minutes.
What you just said is really interesting. It is actually another thing that I had written down was this, like, I had thought of that idea of, like, the right kind of wants the government to be their dad and the left wants the government to be their mom. I think that's something that's kind of, been talked about. I think Michael Shermer actually mentioned that to Jordan Peterson when they talked, which is just kind of an interesting little, like, yeah, you could see how that works. But I really thought about that a lot over the last couple of years. And I thought, like, okay, if the right is kind of the kind of masculine, kind of, they want dad, strong leadership, and the left is kind of the mama's boy. And you mentioned kind of two brothers. It just was like, that's Jacob and Esau. Yeah. But like the spirit of Jacob is the right in America, of Jacob is the left in America, and the spirit of Esau is the right in America in a lot of ways. And I think the thing that to me is like made me really laugh to myself, I guess, is that, like, when you think about, like, Jacob and Esau eventually reconcile. They reconcile the day after. I mean, the night before is when Jacob wrestles with God. I mean, it's like that is the precursor to reconciliation between Jacob and Esau, is Jacob had to wrestle with God. And, like, I don't know, the kind of traditional conservative right wing in me, which is pretty significant still, like, I just find that really funny, the idea that, like, if Jacob, if this kind of, crowd that is the, mama's boy would wrestle with God, then maybe we could come back together. Yeah. But they're still kind of out there playing, doing their shenanigans. And it's not really fair to kind of divide it up that way, but it just makes me laugh to think about it in that framework.
Well, we always divide things. I mean, consciousness is monofocal, and so that sort of leads to all these dualisms, and we can't help but see dualisms, because this and not this. And so that's part of the reason it's number one and number two. It's part of the reason that there's a left and a right, when obviously there's tons of positions, but that's too much for us to manage. So it's left and right, which actually comes from the French Revolution. And it's just that's just
and
how
then
we are.
And I probably will have to go back and watch it again. I was watching it while I was working, but you had another video, I don't know if it was this morning or last night, and it was kind of right and wrong, right? Which I thought was incredibly interesting, just that kind of dichotomy of, like, how, and because I was listening more than watching. I know you were drawing, so I didn't follow the drawings very well, so I'll probably go back and watch it again. But I think there's another kind of good version of that. Like, okay, if everything's going to be broken in two, there's almost like I wish we could just define right and wrong, right? And obviously there's way more complexity to it. But if we would stop thinking about black and white, and we would stop thinking about left and right, and we would stop thinking, and we would just find a way to define right and wrong in any kind of real terms, which obviously we'll never do, then maybe we would have something,
Yeah, I just love videos out there with it. Black and white thinking is wrong. People do it all the time. It's just so, and, I mean, it's just we're humans. This is the kind of thing we do.
Right.
I hate black and white thinking. It's so wrong. Okay. Good.
Yep.
Anyway,
well, I think that that is kind of the next level up of resolution. There's a whole other piece of kind of resolution that you know, I could go on about for quite a while, but I think that's the like getting to that point of recognizing that when you say black and white is wrong, that you are participating in the black and white. Like that really is like there's like this inflection of like, okay, now I understand something I didn't understand, you know, that there's a level above the level that I've been operating at.
Yeah.
And
At least you could say it's wrong-ish. That would be an improvement over.
Right.
Okay, well, at least now you're being a little more consistent.
Right. Yeah, consistency isn't usually our strong suit.
No,
we humans.
We're in too much of a rush to change the world and fix it and set people right. And then for all of our efforts, we're still a mess and a muddle.
Yeah. Well, maybe if we build another arc, everything will be.
That's right. We got to get that arc straight. If we get the arc straight, and if we can map out all of the species in the world, see, the problem is then you really need fast evolution after it, because then suddenly we have to have all of the differentiation of. And so the speed. I love creation scientists. They're tremendously fun because it's sort of like running a puzzle. Can we fit all this in here? And you have to be creative and imaginative. And I think it's lovely. And why would people work at it so hard unless they didn't really believe it and their existential faith wasn't determined by it? So it's like,
well, it's awesome. Funny because it's actually a conversation I had with my brother recently. Is that like you almost have to, the opposition has to take the lead at some point for you to really kind of kick it into gear, right?
Yeah.
Like, just like in any athletic competition, but like that's like the creationists have to be creative now, because for so long that was assumed, and the evolutionists had to be creative because they were trying to put out an idea that didn't fit into the framework.
Yep.
And then they took over the framework because their idea seemed to resonate better with, you know, a lot of people. So then it becomes a creationist job to, if you want to demonstrate that there's something. And of course, you're still playing the materialist game, so none of that works anyway. But it's the same kind. Like I was thinking about that, or the conversation that I had with my brother really came from. I don't know if it was a conversation. It might have been the conversation between Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, where it was like, okay, the theists, you know, maybe not Christians per se, but the Jordan Peterson style theists have passed the kind of Sam Harris style atheists in terms of offering a reasonable structure of the world. They've moved up a level.
Yeah.
And surely somebody will come back, you know, and surpass that. And that fight will go on forever.
Yeah.
But at some point, and that really is, there is kind of a black and white piece of it where like you have to come down on one side or the other, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't just forever say whoever's winning the argument at the time must be the one that's right. Like eventually, I mean, only when Christ returns is the argument won, right? In the meantime, one side's going to have the upper hand at any given point in history. And we just have to go on faith which side, you know, we're going to go with. But it's not because one makes a better argument or whatever. That's where, I mean, that's kind of the point of faith, right? That intersection, but being able to understand that, you know, one's going to get ahead and the other's going to get ahead, and you know, they're going to do that forever. I think also allows you to appreciate your own growth. Like if like wrestling with God sometimes means you're winning and sometimes you're losing. I mean, that's what, you know, Jacob experienced. And so like, you have to be in that place where like, sometimes you're losing and there's better arguments being made and your faith is being tested and questioned to really push to the next kind of plateau or the next peak of what's up there, you know?
Yep.
And I think that, you know,
yep. My favorite quote from the Book of Mormon that I get from my homeless Mormon friend. It's his favorite quote, one of his favorite quotes out of the Book of Mormon. There must be opposition in all things. He'd always say this to me. And one day I said, well, show me that in the Book of Mormon. I always keep a copy on hand for him because you wind up with copies of the Book of Mormon if you live out west. And so then I just keep a stack of them. And then when he loses his latest guy, I say, here's your Book of Mormon. It's a Christian Reformed pastor probably shouldn't be handing out copies of the Book of Mormon. But
yeah, I know some people who would be really disappointed in you.
Yeah. he loses them as fast as I can give it to him. So
Yeah.
it
How much harm could it really be doing?
just
Right?
keeps the Mormon printers in circulation. So
There you go.
anyway, it was great talking to you, Brad. I'll send you the copy of this video, and you can decide if we want to share it, and if you want to.
Sure. I mean, I'll tell you now. I mean, if you want to share, you go right ahead.
Okay.
don't think-
Don't plan on too much back and forth with Brad in the comment section. You can maybe try and bait him. So
If you well, you bait me the way Karen baited me. If you want to talk, you reach out and say, connect with me and we'll talk. I'm happy to do it.
all right. It's great talking to you, Brad.
You too, Paul.
Take care. Bye-bye.